Good morning. Good morning, good morning. That's a lot of voice, isn't it? Mhm. And people on Zoom. Oh, there's the camera. Hi. Welcome on this wonderful spring day with all that fresh rain yesterday. Things are just blooming, blooming. So, as you can see from your program, we're going to be talking, we're going to be looking into this book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, with a great subtitle, Rituals of Renewal and the Sacred Work of Grief. So I had a choice of either giving this talk this Sunday or next Sunday. Next Sunday is Mother's Day. No, I was not going to talk about grief on Mother's Day. No. So this book is so rich, very rich. Susan Nelson and Janet Brown and myself have been doing this 6-month book club kind of study of death and dying, and just a bit of grief in that program. And when I saw this, it was like, aha, more about grief. So that's what the 6-week spring morning study group is going to be on. This one, and it's starting on Tuesday. And it's 7:30 in the morning, and it's in person and Zoom, and it is not an advanced class. Erase that erase that from the computer. So everyone is invited, and that'll be 6 weeks in the morning, very early, very early. So I want to introduce you to the author, Francis Weller, and a little bit of his bio. Francis Weller is a psychotherapist, writer, and soul activator. No, activist. Wouldn't that be good? Wow, activator. So, and he uses, in his writings, he uses the word soul. And some people have trouble with that word, or difficulty with that word. So you can pick, actually, I looked in the dictionary, my Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary from, you'll appreciate this, Tim, 1973. And the definition for soul, the first definition is the immaterial essence, animating principle, or actuating cause of an individual life. It's the first definition. So I'm going to say that's what he means. Second definition is the spiritual principle in human beings, in all rational and spiritual beings, or in the universe. Good? These are good, right? So then I looked up spirit, which is the word, one of the words I would use. And that, well, it's Latin, means spiritus, which is to blow, breathe, an animating or vital principle held to give life to physical organisms. This is great. Yeah. So find any word that means those things to you. It can be spirit, it can be source, essence, Buddha nature, true self. I had a whole list. Where are they? Somewhere. So, back to the intro just a bit. Francis Weller is a master of synthesizing diverse streams of thought from psychology, anthropology, mythology, alchemy, indigenous cultures, and poetic traditions. He has introduced the healing work of ritual to thousands of people. The core of his work is creating pathways to reclaiming our indigenous soul, what psychologist Carl Jung called the unforgotten wisdom that resides in the heart of the psyche. To further this work, he founded and directs Wisdom Bridge, an organization that offers educational programs that seek to integrate the wisdom from traditional cultures with the insights and knowledge gathered from Western cultures. There's more, but we don't need more right now. And so to begin, there's a lovely poem. He uses a lot of poetry in here. There's a lovely poem from Kathleen Dean Moore. Sorrow is part of Earth's great cycles, flowing into the night like cool air sinking down a river course. To feel sorrow is to float on the pulse of the earth, the surge from living to dying, from coming into being to ceasing to exist. Maybe this is why the earth has the power over time to wash sorrow into a deeper pool, cold and shadowed. And maybe this is why, even though sorrow never disappears, it can make a deeper connection to the currents of life, and so connect somehow to sources of wonder and solace. So let us begin. Friends of mine alerted me to this book, and they are using it for some of their healing circles. There's a lot of circles of very, I'll just say, addressing the issues that these circles are dealing with of instability in the climate, health of communities, individuals, families, all of that, and the grief and sorrow that those circles of people are experiencing. The leaders that do these groups were trained in how to support this kind of work, and the benefits have been helpful and encouraging. About 7 years ago, I retired from 10 years of being the chaplain serving hospice in Waldo County in Maine. I think of my little paradise of Belfast, Maine, as a village, and I always have. But having the largest population in the county, 6,000, we had to be a city, but I still think of it as a village, because Francis Weller talks about villages a lot in here. As a chaplain, I tended mostly to death and dying patients and their significant others, often planned and officiated the funeral rituals and sometimes burials. It always seemed unfinished to me. We had some yearly rituals for those who have lost loved ones, but that never seemed like enough. I didn't know what I was missing until I saw this book. The subtitle in The Wild Edge of Sorrow is Rituals of Renewal, and the last part, The Sacred Work of Grief, knocked me off my feet. How do we tend grief? How do we not tend grief? Unless there is a very personal connection with the bereaved, we don't much tend grief after the funeral, especially in the ways that Weller finds we need to. Even though I've had the wonderful opportunity to participate in grief workshops with Joanna Macy and shaman Martine Purcell, those were wonderful. I'm still struck by the subtitle. I never thought of grief as sacred, and I never thought of work as something that, well, let me say it this way. Let me follow what I wrote. Just a minute. Okay. Sacred as work is powerful. Okay. And work in this case told me I had some agency in engaging with grief, not just being bowled over by it and not just a passive recipient of it. Recently had a very interesting experience about grief. There's a 9-year-old great-granddaughter and a grandpa, and the whole family is there in the palliative care unit room. And the 9-year-old would put her body very lightly over the body of grandpa in bed, unconscious. And she would say, "Don't die, Grampy, don't die." And it would get louder and louder. And she would stay there crying, "Don't die, Grampy," until someone came and gently peeled her off and talked to her and held her and then took her out of the room. At the visitation after he died, she continued doing this, loudly crying. She'd reach her arms as high as she could because the corpse was on a table, wrapped in a shroud. This was a green burial, wrapped in a shroud, with just the face showing. And she would wrap herself around it, and she would just cry and cry and cry. And again, a parent or another grandparent would come and take her, very kind to her, very soothing, and remove her from the room. Each time this happened, the same process would happen. Someone would tend to her. She wasn't being neglected, and someone would take her out of the room, away from everybody else. And at the green burial, we all, including her, put fresh flowers on the shroud-wrapped corpse and began lowering it into Mother Earth. She wailed and wailed as it was lowered, and again someone tended to her. Not enough of us who were there knew how much this was needed and natural and healthy, and that we could have joined her, wailing to the sky, our grief pouring out of us. Communal wailing may be the language of grief, a form of singing to open our hearts. Weller reminds us that we evolved in groups, in nature, completely dependent on everything and everyone. The truth of interdependence must have been very clear then. The truth that everything changes all the time, is impermanent, dies, becomes something else, and so much more obvious when living in and with nature. The village would have wailed with her. We say yes to sympathetic joy. We may have to relearn how to sing sympathetic grief. Another situation, another funeral years ago, was an active, much loved, athletic high school teacher, coach. He was involved in everything in the community, a father, a wonderful father and husband. And he walked out of the school, went to his car to unlock it and leave, and he had a heart attack and dropped between two cars. And nobody saw him do that and didn't see them when they were all leaving, so he didn't have that opportunity for early care, and he died. And at the funeral, his widow read the poem In Blackwater Woods, and I don't know how she did it. And we'll see if I can do it. Look, the trees are turning their own bodies into pillars of light, are giving off the rich fragrance of cinnamon and fulfillment. The long tapers of cattails are bursting and floating away over the blue shoulders of the ponds, and every pond, no matter what its name is nameless now. Every year, everything I have ever learned in my lifetime leads back to this. The fires and the black river of loss, whose other side is salvation, whose meaning none of us will ever know. To live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. What happened next was not planned, but spontaneous, like the great-grandchild. The language, the song of grief just came up out of us. From the overpacked church out to the street, the communal wail of grief just kept coming and coming and coming till it was done. This is where interdependence, interbeing, and impermanence crash together, imploding and exploding together. That communal wailing song and language of grief tended all of us. We evolved in communities, villages, tribes, parishes, sanghas, neighborhoods, large extended families. Weller shows that we need both communal grieving, wailing, and silent communal and or solitary grieving. I have a story of my first ever Rahatsu 7-day session. It was my first retreat ever. 7 days. So the silence, as many of you know, was so powerful. It was just wonderful. I felt the energy of everybody in that room. There was a woman on this side and a woman on this side, and we were against that wall, and it was completely full. So the silence, we're doing the same thing. We're breathing in and out. We're still. We're silent. Felt like an amazing, open yet protective container. The woman next to me on this side seemed to be having, I noticed her out-breaths would be a little shaky sometimes. And I noticed that she had a hanky in her mudra. And when the bell would ring, she would dab her face. And during Kinhin, she would leave and she would come back. And for 7 days, this was going on. And I got a little worried about her. And at one point, I went and found the person who was leading, where you're supposed to be and what you're doing, and I said, I think the person next to me is having a problem. And I said, she's silently weeping. And he said, oh yes. Her son, who lives in San Francisco, was going to come and sit this Rahatsu Sesshin here with her. But he was robbed and stabbed and died on San Francisco Zen Center steps a couple of months ago. And I went back in and sat down next to her, and I thought, if this practice can hold a person up after that happens, I want it. It was just amazing to know how, I don't need to say anymore. It was just, people could have told me how good meditation is for you in a group doing retreats 1,000,000 times. And this just was the example that she gave me. It's quite a gift. So the importance of communal silence and of solitude. Cultivating an inner sense of equanimity is vital. Practices that quiet the mind help us notice the space between the out-breath and the next in-breath. Everything and nothing is in that space. That's where spaciousness of everything and nothing is. Noticing it allows compassion to come up and tenderly hold the wild, piercing emotions of grief. Having a practice is essential for us to build capacity to work with sorrow and offer ourselves the support we need at times of grief. Don't wait until you really need it. Develop and practice it now. Deep work requires a holding space, a vessel. And as Ted mentioned a couple weeks ago, that any focused, regular, intentional practice, art, music, writing, movement, meditation, will support this development, this capacity, especially if you participate regularly. Practice deepens our availability to soul, source, true self, Dharma nature, heart, mind. It invites revelation. It invites the marginal voices to speak and be heard. Practice reminds us and supports us to live from that deep well of things as they are. Francis Weller, in this book, identified 5 gates of grief, and I'm calling them 5 Dharma gates of grief. And the importance of both practices, communal rituals to communicate our anguish and loss with the language and song of grief, and the practices of silence in community or not, and solitude to hold us tenderly with strength and openness. So I'm going to expose the 5 Dharma gates to you. I think I will read this poem first. Or did I already? I think I did. Oh, Tim, what will become of us? He's always ahead of me, always ahead of me. Gosh. Okay, I'm going to do this anyway. So these are Weller's words. It was through the dark waters of grief that I came to touch my unlived life. There is some strange intimacy between grief and aliveness, some sacred exchange between what seems unbearable and what is most exquisitely alive. Through this, I have come to have a lasting faith in grief. So the first of the 5 Dharma gates is something most of us are very familiar with, and that is everything we love, we will lose. Everything, everything. So the poem that's here, I'm looking for the title of the author. I don't see it. The book is rich in discerning quotations, so here's some of them. "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch, to love, to hope, to dream, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools, this love, but a holy thing, to love what death can touch." The second Dharma gate of grief really surprised me. Something is caught. It's the places that have not known love. These are the places within us that have been wrapped, warped in shame, and banished to the furthest shores of our lives. These neglected pieces of soul live in utter despair. The proper response to any loss is grief, but we cannot grieve for something that we feel is outside the circle of worth. The third Dharma gate of grief is the sorrows of the world, and we're getting more and more exposed to all of that. This is the gate of more grief and the suffering of the world, and it has long been known as the fundamental human dilemma. Suffering exists is the first noble truth of the Buddha. How to face suffering is at the heart of the great religious and philosophical traditions. This is from Naomi Nye's. Before you know kindness and the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak it till your voice catches on the thread of all sorrows and you can see the size of the cloth. The fourth Dharma gate is another one that surprised me, is what we expected and did not receive. Deep in our bones lies an old intuition that we arrive here carrying a bundle of gifts to offer the community. In a sense, it is a form of spiritual employment. Hidden within the losses at this gate lies our diminished experience of who we truly are. This one is by Rilke. Not to be cut off, not through the slightest partition shut out from the law of the stars. the inner. What is it? If not intensified sky, hurled through with birds and deep with the winds of homecoming. And the fifth Dharma gate is the gate of ancestral grief. This is the grief we carry in our bodies from sorrows experienced by our ancestors. Tending this undigested grief of our ancestors is not only frees us to live our own lives, but also eases ancestral suffering in the other world. I don't know quite which other world they're speaking of. These gates offer us a way of acknowledging the many ways sorrow enters our lives. In this way, we are able to honor and heal the inevitable times of loss we each will face. Weller's gift lies in bringing soul and community to places that are often met with denial or fear. This helps free us from facing our loss in isolation. The simple truth is that great loss is wasted if we do not use it over time to discover what lies beyond great loss. For this, Weller quotes the great naturalist and essayist Terry Tempest Williams, one sentence: "Grief dares us to love once more." I have the feeling there's something else, but I can't find it. Some last, oh yes, here it is. I think. Here. Here it is. Practice offers us many chances. And these are Weller's words. It appears that we humans are the one creature on the planet that repeatedly forget who we are. We lose presence, forget to lean into life, and live half-hearted. We slip into modes of existence that are truly separate from the nature of who we are. Practice is designed to help us recall our vital essence. In fact, we could say that life is one continuous act of remembering, of gathering ourselves back together again and again, and living from the deep well of things as they are. And then I've added from another poem, the last paragraph. It's by Rebecca Del Rio, and it says, she says, "Live the life that chooses you, new every breath, every blink of your astonished eyes." I think that's it. And if there are any comments or questions that maybe I can't answer, we have some time. How much time do we have? A couple of minutes? Okay. And I guess Phil, we usually do the Zoom. Can I call you Zoomers? I just want to so badly. Do the Zoomers have any questions?
You can ask them to unmute and speak or raise their hand.
Unmute and speak or raise your hand, and Phil is watching. for you to raise your hand. We have someone in the back here.
Yes, Bonnie, I really appreciated that story of the little girl who was crying, and it would have been so nice if others would have joined in with her. You know, I was substitute teaching in a preschool classroom, and this little 4-year-old girl was raising her hand to get called on this week, and she wasn't getting called on, and you could see the tears building, and then she just lost it. And I realized, like, she just needed to get it out, you know. You can't stop that process, whether it's a school situation or a funeral or whatever. You just got to get it out. So,
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Yes.
Morning, thank you
Good morning.
for what you said. From hearing most of what was in the book is, as a grandparent, how does one get before the event? How does one develop some of this sense and relationship and preparation, if you will? Most of what seemed to be in the book is how to deal with grief after an event. So how does one know we're still alive and still able to interact? How do you think that, how does this reflect on what we do while we still can form a bridge from the before to the after?
I think I understand your question, and I think I answered it a little bit, but I'll just check with you. The encouragement to have a practice of meditation or any of the other things that people can dedicate themselves to allows for that very personal interior space and training to be available to the present moment. And the group that I mentioned in Maine are actually doing some of the workshops of Francis Weller after being trained how to support people in doing that, where there is rituals. And this, in here he also has personal rituals that you can do so that you might know what to do in a future situation. And there's actually the ones I've been to with Joanna Macy and Martine Purcell, there are communal rituals of wailing, and they're beautiful and they're very beneficial. And I don't know, I'm sure there's information, and I want to have it, about how Francis Weller is, when he comes to Minnesota to do this, or other people, you know, that are trained in this. Is that, am I close at all?
Again, I'm going back to the how do you prepare in advance while we're still alive. So yeah, because
A little bit.
part of what you said is the community, the individual after, and I'm sort of directed toward the community, the individuals, particularly the individuals, the children, the grandchildren, before, to let them know that there's a comfort on your side, you know, to have a dialogue, I guess, in advance of what this means. At least in my hearing of the summary, most of it was the community, the individual responses, and the openness after the event.
Yeah, the
And
griefs
I'm
we
moving the
carry.
grief afterward,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to tease out a kind of preparation for that, or a kind of comfort with that, not a comfort with it, but a pathway that perhaps ameliorates, or at least says this is okay in advance.
Yes, I would think talking about it and listening, really listening for what their fears are, or if they're fine. I have an example of when I was chaplain in Maine, and I was in this room with an elderly man who was dying, and his wife, and I needed to check on a few things. He was still alive, and she was tending him. And I went out of the room and he came back about half an hour later, and there were more family in the room, and there was one little 5, 6-year-old, and the grandmother was holding her, and the little girl was saying, "Grandma, why does Grandpa look so different?" And she said, "Oh, that's not Grandpa anymore. That's the house Grandpa lived in when he was with us." And she said, "Okay." So it can be simple, can be. And the book is rich with, yeah, and the class.
I have a little quick personal story. My grandfather just passed on, and what helped me the most is knowing that he was ready. And it was a really wild story, actually. And his best friend, who was born a week before him, died a week before him. Isn't that wild? And he said when his best friend died, he said, "Oh, I wish it was me. I'm ready." And so that experience for a whole family, I think, was so healing to know. Yeah.
Family was ready. That's really, yeah, that kind of dialogue before.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, excellent, excellent.
Of course.
Am I avoiding the Zoomers?
Nope.
No.
You've got a question from Judy online.
Hi, Judy.
Something that's valuable for me in the book is that people who have serious illnesses, who have trauma in their life, or who have struggles, are using this work of Francis Weller.
Yes.
So when they come together in groups, they're not just grieving the loss of someone, they're grieving their own impermanence, their own transiency, and being able to go through that process. And it's so powerful. There's all kinds of things we grieve, not just death and dying. So that particular part of the book has really been helpful to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, and I'm so glad you're talking about this today.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Yes. Yes.
So I have a question. I think communities and villages and how we exist is different than how it was perhaps when we were in these small communities. And how do we kind of draw these lines on who and how should we exist? Okay, so if we wailed for everyone that we ever met, I feel we'd all always be wailing. So I don't mean to make too much light, but how can we wail to the correct degree with everyone around us?
Do you mean finding a place that's safe for you to do that?
No. I mean, my community is huge. Like if everyone has sorrows and losses,
right?
How do you exist in a way that you're there for everybody, but you're also not just in a permanent state of wailing?
Very good question. Yes. I'm looking to see if I have an answer.
I think part of it is just the communities that we exist in are different than the smaller tribes or villages.
Yes, very definitely, very different.
But that doesn't mean we should ignore that it's a different way to be that,
Right. There are, I'm going to refer to this again, or encourage you to come to the class, or get the book and read it yourself, but there are all kinds of personal rituals you can do that are short, or just in nature, find a place and thank nature for that person having been in your life or something. It can be very small. It can be just a second of stopping so you're totally with what you're doing, and even talking to the person who passed. Just thanks for being my friend, or boy, that was stupid, or, any number of things that we feel when someone passes or leaves us in some other way. Is that at all helpful? No.
I didn't mean to shrug as it wasn't. It wasn't
No.
helpful, but I guess I meant it for other people who are wailing. I mean, I have had losses in my life, so I appreciate that, but how you're kind of there for other people is a little bit more where I was coming with that. Yeah.
Being able to listen and listen for the feeling, not necessarily the words. Listen for what they're feeling, and if you can be, and you're practicing being with that feeling, you will understand it, might even recognize it. So that's another thing that we can practice doing, is listening for the emotion of what they're going through, not necessarily the words. Is that helpful? Okay, thank you.
Bonnie?
Yes,
You have Paul with his hand up online.
Paul,
Hi, thank you, Bonnie.
you're welcome.
I have to admit that this might be a little derailing from the conversation, but I do kind of feel like I'm still kind of dealing with a little bit of grief myself, not from loss, but from the pandemic. I feel like I was in college when it began, and we had to start doing everything all online, and it just kind of gave me a little bit of a fear of missing out, I guess, because I wasn't going to see my friends again for a long while, and later on that kind of spiraled into alienation, and not just depression, but also kind of a sense of misanthropy. And I don't know if that's necessarily what grief is like, but I mean, I feel like since then I have myself become a little aware of my impermanence as well. And it's kind of something that I've been still struggling with and still kind of trying to recover from. I mean, I've made a few strides here and there, but it's something that's been pretty difficult to heal from, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking of, I hear you. I'm thinking of something. I bet I remember. I was looking for it before too, and I couldn't find it. Aha, here it is. I'm just going to read this. It's a paragraph. Do I have time? Yes, I do. Okay. So, and anyway, I'll read this, see if this touches what you're saying at all. All too often we deny our grief because it is not as severe as someone else's. How can we possibly compare our sorrows to those who are suffering the horrors of war or the devastation brought about by tornadoes and hurricanes and tsunamis or intolerable poverty? It is easy to dismiss our grief when we compare it to circumstances we consider to be so much worse than our own. But the grief is ours, and we must treat it as worthy of attention. In fact, it is essential for us to welcome our grief, whatever form it takes. When we do, we open ourselves to our shared experience in life. Grief is our common bond. Opening to our sorrow connects us with everyone, everywhere. There is no gesture of kindness that is wasted, no offering of compassion that is useless. We can be generous to every sorrow we see, including our own. It is sacred work. I don't know if that helps.
It helps a lot. Thank you so much. That really feels very validating.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
I've noticed in dealing with grief the importance of allowing your heart to open, and that can come from movement and it can come from sound. I went to a funeral where there were bagpipes playing, and that just tears you open and everything gushes forth. And it just, it feels better to allow that to happen than to scrunch in and try to hold everything inside.
Yes. I experience that in every parade that has bagpipes. Yes, and you can feel it. You really can. And in the wailing groups that I've been in or experienced, you can feel it. You can feel it leaving. Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes.
And I don't know if it's a culture thing here or what, but the past many people, many friends, community that have gone through grief, they seem to think they should get over it within a certain amount of time. And I've noticed that just saying, you know, this is normal, like it's like helps a lot. Have you experienced that in your time as a hospice nurse or hospice worker too?
Yes, absolutely. Because you can't go back and make it not have happened. It doesn't, where was that one about? It doesn't disappear. It's right here somewhere. Da, 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 da.
And where do you think that comes from, where people feel like they need to heal in like 1 week, 2 weeks and get back to normal?
Well, it comes from what we think is normal. First of all, that everything stays the same. Nothing stays the same. And I think it comes from our culture, dampening down on emotions or, you know, keep it quiet. Certainly the culture of the 50s. Would you agree, Tim? That's right, it was the 1950s. Something in here says, maybe this isn't the one. Though sorrow never disappears. Yeah. The person you lost is gone. The accident where now you can't walk, it's that, you know, I mean, it's both things, but I think our culture doesn't support, you know, sometimes when I see news and it's some horrible thing has happened and it's in some other country and there's a woman on the ground draped over this dead body and all the neighbors are there with their hands on her and each other, and we don't do that, you know, so that grief can get stuck. So, but allowing people to know that it's normal, what you say to them, I think is helpful. And then just listen if that's what they need to, if you have, you know, the time to do that. You're welcome. Yes, Andrea.
One of the 5 points, I think I understood it. Was it something like the grief of not receiving something you expected to receive?
Yes.
No, that one really reminded me of a lot of my life story, and also of other people that I know who get into, say, relationships that they expected to be a certain way and received something and then it didn't turn out that way. And there's no, or being married to someone who has dementia or something where that person is no longer available to you, but there's no avenue for grieving, or you've lost your future that you imagined because something happened, and you know, all of those kinds of grieving or griefs, I think they're almost like an everyday thing that I just hear it from a lot of people, and I feel it myself, or I'm aware of myself feeling that this is a feeling of grief. It's hard to put a name on it, but yeah, I just that one thing that you had, I wanted to call it out a little bit.
Yeah,
I thought it was important.
yeah, that one took me by surprise too. Really? You know, this is real, yeah. Yes.
Could you talk just a little bit more about the group? Are you just gonna be discussing the book, or are you gonna explore some kind of ritual together?
I invite Janet Brown to say a few things. I hope she accepts the invitation.
Yes, well, thank you. I do. Bonnie, I just want to say this is beautiful, and I'm so excited to delve into this book more, because I do think this is something that we do not allow ourselves in our society. I think there is societal pressure, again, to get over grief quickly, to not recognize all the ambiguous grief that we experience. I recently heard Dr. Pauline Boss, who's a professor at the U, who's phenomenal, and has a new book out called Ambiguous Loss, and naming a lot of the things that we can't even name: the pandemic, COVID, just all the climate grief, societal grief, racial tensions. That there's all this grief that we process in addition to the loss of personal losses within our life. So to answer your question, we will be delving into not only the book, we'll be covering a couple chapters each session, kind of delving into these Dharma gates, and but we also will be bringing in ritual. And as Katie, you talked about, that sometimes sound therapy or other things can bring out some of this grief that we have trapped in our systems. And so we will be bringing those rituals and some resources into this, and help provide some ritual and practices for all of us to participate in. I'm very excited. I hope folks can join us, and it's not too early.
Yeah.
You're done by 9.
And when you come Tuesday morning, 7:30, we're hoping that you've gotten the book. And are there some?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm glad you mentioned it. Kim has purchased some books. We purchased, so we have books in the syllabus on the porch. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards, or Bonnie once she's done. So.
And also, we're asking people to be prepared for the first class on Zoom or in person to have read the foreword, the preface, and the first 2 chapters. It's only 55 pages. It's not too much. It's not too much. So, time, I see, it is 11. We should close, and thank you very much. Thank you.